is the learning process to all partners. I have learned from Czech colleagues, I have learned from Armenian colleagues all the time, and I'm sure that we all in this kind of projects we learn from each other, and that's the value. We are sharing our best practices, identify our own neighbors' maybe problems in the administration, and really together try to find the solutions. And why this work is so important? It's important because the administrative structure is one of the key elements. Of course, legislation is the other one for the effective biodiversity protection. And what is common for Czech Republic, Finland, and Armenia is that we all are not huge countries, but let's say smaller countries, and economy is limited. And it means that in all these countries there's an urgent need for cost-effective administration. We have to be effective in what we are doing. And this is just one of those elements which is common to all these three countries. But as was mentioned in earlier presentations, also we share many other similar features between these countries. And one is the attitude towards work. When we do something, we really try to do it seriously, do our best. And this has been one of the things which has been helping us, as we really had to speed up our work after the pandemic finally ended. Also, other speakers mentioned this same fact. Biodiversity is the most valuable natural resource in Armenia. It's even more valuable than many people think. And it's not just a value as such, but it's also economical value. And when we think about the value of genetic material that your endemic species maintain, you only in future you will realize how much values are in these. And actually Voskehat was showing some numbers indicating the numbers of species. Of course, from these species numbers we can estimate that in some taxons actually most of the species have not found yet, and many of them are actually endemic. So there are endemic species in this country which do not have name yet. So these are things that can be taken into account when planning the future cooperation and further steps together. But really what I want to highlight is that securing biodiversity is really securing life for the future generations. And at the moment already and always, the well-being is dependent on viable ecosystems. And also the economy is dependent on viable ecosystems. Those countries, for example, many countries in Africa, where the ecosystems have collapsed, it has caused the collapse of economy, and it has been sometimes the original reason for political conflicts as well. So taking care of the ecosystems is really taking care of well-being and security at the same time. And just like Thomas said, when we started, first it took for a while to get familiar with the administration, people, legislation, and way of life and way of working. But after you have reached this certain point, it's much easier to continue. And really, here it was quite easy because the values in this country are similar to those that we have. So I will end up to this point and let Jaakko to continue, but from my side I already say thank you.
Hello everyone, thank you Lucine and Petri for the introduction. Makes my job a whole lot easier. So our job was to evaluate the institutional setup and give some good tips on how to develop it. But of course the first step in this process was the evaluation of this situation. Here we have a timeline of what we did here, around 1 year, and as you can see the assessment took the most time. We really wanted to get into the heart of Armenia and understand what's happening here, what are the problems, and what are the positive things occurring here. And we also had 6 trainings and 2 workshops, but we'll talk about that in more detail later. So, what was the origin? As was mentioned previously, COVID was a real problem with us, but the roundtable meeting in 21 was the initial evaluation phase. That's where we got the first impressions on what is needed and what is good here. But as you can imagine, it was a bit more challenging for us to really get to the point of the situation online. Then we have our dear friend and colleague Jinrich, who's been living here for 2 years, who's been an incredible member of our team. He has traveled Armenia. I don't even know how many days he has spent sleeping in tents and walking around, but without him this wouldn't have been possible. He has seen so many things, and he has given us great ideas on how the institutional setup works here. We have had the chance of going on field trips. I have had 7 different trips here, and we have seen quite a lot of Armenia. From cities to the countryside to the biodiversity hotspots of Armenia. And of course, we have had stakeholder meetings. We have had some lengthy discussions with different people from different organizations. We have heard their ideas, their problems with the administration, and of course the positive things. What is actually functioning here well? And you have some stakeholders here, but of course we have seen many more than can be shown here. Functional analysis, which Lucine already mentioned. Some simple math, but we technically evaluated who does and what in the environmental sector in Armenia. Just giving responsibilities and seeing whether something seems a bit out of the ordinary to us Finns. Okay, what did we find? The challenges. What needs to be done better? In our field trips, we of course saw some visible problems, which indicate that there might be some challenges in administration and in management. Now we have plastic pollution, removal or absence of dead wood, we have overgrazing and undergrazing. Something you can see worldwide. In Finland we have these same problems. And on their own, they may not be big issues, but if you neglect to take care of them, they become bigger and bigger problems. This was already mentioned in Terkka's speech maybe. Insufficient biodiversity data and no open access database. If we don't have proper data, how can we expect the environmental administration to give good recommendations, to come up laws that are efficient? Impossible. So you need good data. The result of our functional analysis was rather clear. The Ministry of Environment has a huge number of responsibilities. And if they are having a hard time at the moment working with this workload, what happens in the future when new international demands and duties and responsibilities come to their table? What happens then? Probably nothing good. Something is missing from their work. We also found that the staff turnover rate is relatively high, meaning that people come to work for the ministry or from some other environmental organization, but then they leave. because the salaries are not competitive. They go to a consulting company, they go abroad, and that's a huge problem. You lose tremendous expertise. And when you lose these good experts, you need to train new people, so that increases costs. And sometimes these experts leave on their 2 weeks notice, and then they don't even tell the next lady or man who's coming to fill their job that what they did. So we have this inefficiency in knowledge sharing. Not enough knowledge sharing between organizations. There are a number of protected areas and different SNCOs and other environmental organizations. But do they share good common practices? Not enough, if at all. At least with SNCOs or protected areas, the sharing of good practices should be more than encouraged. It will make them efficient, it will decrease costs, and it will even motivate people more. For example, if rangers got to talk to each other from different protected areas, maybe they would then like to do their jobs even more efficiently and they would be happier. Now, I have depressed you enough. I will give the floor to my dear colleague Aija, who will cheer you up with the solutions we came up with.
So, as Jaakko said, there are many issues, but we also identified solutions. So we have 5 key solutions that we identified for these problems and that we would like to recommend. So the first one is that the Ministry of Environment should delegate some tasks that are not on the strategic level to other governmental institutions. And this would lead to increased efficiency in the ministry and also in the other organizations under the ministry. And the second one that was also mentioned by the component 1 people is that there is need for creating a national biodiversity database, because this would lead to efficient data flow to, for example, the governing authorities. And here is an example of a Finnish national biodiversity database, laji.fi. You can have a look at it if you want. It works quite well, in my opinion. There's still a lot of things to develop, but it is quite good. And I heard that you are already actually developing your own database, so that is very nice to hear. And the third recommendation is that the continuity of expertise in institutions should be ensured, for example, by competitive salaries, making the employment periods longer, and so on, because this would lead to accumulation of knowledge in the institutions, efficiency of executing tasks, and there would be less need for training, so it would be, everything would be more efficient, so this would lead to saving money. And the fourth recommendation is ensuring sufficient and permanent funding for the organizations under the ministry and the ministry itself. This is quite obvious, but it needs to be mentioned. And the fifth recommendation is improving the coordination, cooperation and knowledge sharing within and across organizations. And this refers not only to the ministry and the organizations under it, but also, for example, NGOs and scientific institutions. And especially with the ministry and the organizations under it, this would lead to fewer overlaps and gaps in the responsibilities of these different institutions. And so, as part of this project, we also had 6 training sessions for this component too. I will not go to them very deeply because we don't have so much time. They were for different target groups, for example, international conventions and intergovernmental panels was one topic. Then there were some requirements and responsibilities for international reporting on biodiversity, development of management and restoration plans, biodiversity and its monitoring. And we also had a field session during this training in the Coastal Forest State Reserve. Data flow and management, and sustainable ecotourism. And we also had 2 workshops on the institutional setup needs. So in the end, we made 4 different options for the possible institutional reform in Armenia. So the first option was that there would be no changes to the current structure, and the improvement would come from strengthening the capacities of the existing institutions. And this would be the cheapest of the options. No, it would not require as much excess funding as the other options, but the negative side of it would be that it wouldn't be very likely to meet the future needs of biodiversity protection. And the second option would envision the creation of a combined Forest and Protected Areas Committee. And in this option, the positive thing would be that it wouldn't require creating a completely new organizational body. So you would be able to use the existing institutional background. But the negative side is that there would be only a limited positive impact on biodiversity protection outside forests and protected areas. And the third option is creating a new intermediate coordinating body under the Ministry of Environment, and this so-called Nature Conservation Agency or committee, or whatever you would like to call it. It would coordinate many SNCOs under it. And obviously this option would be the most expensive of the options presented so far, but it would be also the most likely to cause a significant positive change. And after thinking about these 3 options for a long time, we came up with the 4th option that would be essentially combining all these 3 previously mentioned options into like a long-term plan for improvement. So here is a picture of what is envisioned. So on the top we have current time, and it goes the bottom of the picture shows the future. So in the first part, on the blue background, there is the enhancement of the current structures, and on the yellow bottom there is a strong development of these key organizations of nature protection. And in the next phase, on the green background, you would merge these institutions into one organization. And after these phases have been completed, you would need to assess the future needs again and further the development based on those. And between or in the middle of every phase, there would be assessment of the development and adjustment of the process according to the assessment. And there would be a working group needed for the coordination of this process. And this option, this 4th option, was favored by the ministry. And as a few people, at least Minister Memarian, have said already, we need everyone to participate in this protection of biodiversity. It is a joint effort, so it's not only the ministry, it is not only the environmental sector, it is also other sectors and ministries that should be involved in this work. And I would like to thank everyone for interest and wish you all the success. Snorakalutsiun.
Thank you, Aija. So what do you think? Any opinions about these proposals changing the agencies? I personally see it that changing the law is relatively easy because you are changing only the words on paper, but changing the institution and institutional setup is much difficult because you have to change the minds of people, what they think and how they work. So I think it's much more difficult and much more like a long-term task. And there was a question.
Շնորհակալություն Արման Վերմիշյան, Կովկասի բնության հիմնադրամ։ Կառուցվածքային փոփոխությունների հետ կապված նախարարության տեսակետը կուզեի լսեինք եւս մեկ անգամ եւ ավելի մի քիչ մանրամասն արդյոք ներկայացված սխեման ընդունելի է թե ոչ
the scheme that was projected, whether this is acceptable for the ministry or not, and whether you have conducted an ex ante evaluation, because I heard that there was some costing, at least for the options. So has there been any ex ante costing for this one? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vermishan. As I already noted, the work that has already been done was fully acceptable for the ministry because there was detailed and thorough analysis, and the recommendation is about steps, a stepwise process. As it was already mentioned, this is a long-term process, and for every step there was a specific timeline set. And regardless of anything, I want to say that this is going to be the baseline which we're going to be guided by when we undertake institutional and structural changes. And today we have a specific focus and line of thought where we would delineate various services, the PA and the forestry preservation services. We are thinking about creating a dedicated preservation service, but this preliminary analysis is not going to hinder our processes at all. Շնորհակալություն, երկու հարց կա։ Տիկին դեսպան։ Շնորհակալություն, ուզում էի սրա հետ կապված մեկնաբանություն անել։
Culture and leadership and management culture. So I do know how difficult it is, but I also know that it's doable. You need to bring people together. That's number one. Bring them, force them to come into one room if needed. Hear them out so that everybody will, at the end of the day, understand that this change of, for instance, knowledge exchange or continuation of career information, career or work-related information is mainly benefiting you, not the others, but it's benefiting you. And when you start seeing, or one starts seeing how much information sharing is developing your work, that's when you're already one step ahead. And it is important that everybody is heard. This cannot be imposed. It has to be a generic development. And it's also very important that you have the development or change agents. You have people, individuals, who believe in this and take this into the system themselves from within. And as I've been talking to people, there was also one twinning project on civil service development. This is a problem overall, not only in Armenia, it's everywhere. Because you tend to be very jealous of your work and of your information, but really building up a solid civil service and governance culture. This is a vital thing, and I have to thank my Finnish colleagues for bringing this out. The steps are not that complicated, actually, at the end of the day, if you take them seriously. Please do. Thank you.
Thank you. There was one question and then Petri.
Շնորհակալություն ես դիտարկում ավելի շուտ կանեմ ես ուզում եմ մեր գործընկերոջը ասեմ որ ոչ թե պետք է
that we should not think about our future generations. We need to start thinking about ourselves. Our future generations will not have a good life unless we focus on our life right now. So the recommendation that I would like to highlight, recently the minister finally invited us during these last 2 years for the first time ever, and we need to restore this practice of collecting and inviting people to talk to them. So I've seen already 6 or 7 ministers, but I'm still here. And unfortunately, every new minister comes in, they bring in new things, they leave, their novelties do not sustain, they do not persist. We need to think about institutional setup that is sustainable, not new ministers coming in and changing the structure, but rather them adapting to the existing structure. In 2017, there was an order to create a scientific and technological council who would work under the ministry or adhering to the ministry. So we are not paid for that, and people are really eager to come in to contribute to the work of the ministry, but unfortunately these people's expertise is not really made use of. So this is a very important public council which needs to be operant, and we can come to contribute to the work of the ministry. And by the way, you stated several times today that awareness raising is important, and it's not just stated today. I have been hearing this for over 10 years. So people speak about the need for awareness raising, but then we do not ensure this awareness. If you go out into the street and you just ask people what is biodiversity, I do not think that many would answer you. So there are very few people who are really informed about that, and I keep making this recommendation that perhaps you could have a TV show on environmental shows, because we have a lot of absurdity on TV, but we do not see useful things. And the written recommendations on our part, we will already submit it to the minister. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So there was a question related to cost of the improving the administration, and of course this is a question that immediately comes to everybody's mind, that who pays and where do we get the money. And luckily we are in the situation that the World Bank was inviting us to a meeting during our last working session here. And they were asking, like, has the ministry accepted our proposals? And I said that positive, yes, ministry has positive attitude to our proposals, and they indicated that in that case they will support this process that ministry will start. So I think this kind of very positive indication from the World Bank you should take to account and take the benefit from this good situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Reactions? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the questions too. With your permission, I would like to go back a few slides on this presentation, and I would like to stop on this slide, and I would like to respond to the question as to every new minister comes in and undertakes rapid changes. So in response to this question, I want to stress the responsibility, and I, as a curating the deputy minister, are responsible for, along with the departments who are operating in the sector. As you would see, the reform starts in 2023, and 2003 and 24 are for the empowerment and strengthening the capacity of our agencies. That is to say, the whole process is going to cover a period of 8 years, and we do not rule out the possibility that there would be new appointments of new ministers and deputy ministers in this time period. And you can see that we have selected this longer timeline because we are striving for higher stability in our administrative bodies. That is to say, for the first stage, we will try to build capacity of our entities to analyze their strengths and weaknesses. And then in 2024-25, we will see that there is an assessment of development. That is to say, all the analysis that we have conducted and then the development that we have ensured will be later assessed. And after they get positively assessed, we will move on to the next stage. So, and then we are even enhancing the capacity in the already newly emerged, consolidated, established agencies. And if you take a while to look into it deeper, you will see that these processes are not quite rapid, but it is also possible that they will really take up a higher speed, because everything depends on us. If we see that in 2023, 2024, we get adapted to the psychological to those changes, and that our analysis indicates which entities work more efficiently, and we will have better and more efficient and effective nature conservation and protection, then it is possible that we'll undertake these reforms at a quicker pace. And speaking about Mr. Vermishan's question, we're creating the Forest Service, and because we come to the point that it was us who delineated the Forestry Committee from PAs. That was our structural choice. But actually, the preservation or in the conservation is one. That is the reason why we're thinking about creating the Forestry Service that would be covering both Hayantar and the PAs. But we're, of course, going to prioritize things here. That is, we'll start out with Hayantar in order to have a new quality service. Because once we are assured that we have succeeded in the implementation of the service, which would be specifically responsible for the conservation of Armenian forests, whereas Hayantaras and CO will do the conservation itself, because conservation is already a service, and later, one by one, we will include the PAs. And our logic shows that it would be nicer for us to start out with Dilijan National Park, and then Sunik will come kick in, and only after that, given the ecosystem situation, we will go down to Khosrov State Reserve or Sevan National Park and RP Lake National Park, because we have a more complicated and complex situation there. So as Ms. Ambassador already mentioned, change starts with us. It starts with our psyche, our mentality, and the first stage will be overcome first, and then we will have the assessment. Of course, we already have the log frame, but we will take individual steps. We will have an assessment, and then we will move on. If you have any questions, I will gladly take them. My question is not for the ministry, but rather our other partners, our colleagues. So you developed the document, which is quite extensive, which is about both legislative change and institutional reform. And we heard that the implementation might be an issue. I'm wondering whether there were any recommendations in relation to the steps to be undertaken in order to rule out further institutional and legislative gaps, and maybe there would be some exchange of experience also in this regard.
So at least we made this functional analysis during our in our component, and you can base the future changes on this analysis and refine it more if you want.
And then if you look at this picture, you see that after every step there's the assessment phase, and this is necessary because world is changing all the time. So if you try to do all the details already at the beginning, maybe before you come to next step, the world has already changed. So there's actually like no point to take too many details at the same time, but to look at the situation after a couple of years, like how the first steps have been serving the needs and what are the new needs. So I think it's necessary to go through this step by step and then think maybe there are some follow-up activities needed to make this process really strong. But I think ministry really has this attitude, and this will go to very good direction. I trust this.
Խոսքը նաև նախորդ քննարկման մասին էր, բացի այս որ
the previous discussion, not just this structure or the scheme, but the legislation-related recommendations that were made by our Czech partners in order to make sure that these legislative amendments are implemented, that they're not just a document on paper. What can you recommend? What can we undertake in order to make sure that there is no gap in the implementation? Because we know that we have very beautifully written laws at the moment, but we have a lot of deficiencies and gaps in relation to their implementation on the ground. So I'm wondering whether with your support it is possible to improve the situation or not. Ինչպես իմ գործընկերները արդեն նշեցին, իրենց աշխատանքի անկյունակարերից մեկը
which is a tool that makes sure that there are no gaps, that we don't overlook anything, and it clearly analyzes all the requirements that come from the EU legislation and basically links them to what the provisions in Armenia are and what are the missing parts. So I hope this answers the question. No. No.
Sorry, we're holding up the lunch. I think we actually, or the project doesn't have instruments to ensure that the ministry will accept the proposals, right? It's the aim of the project was to implement drafts, but we did some actually measures for it to be acceptable. For example, there were the seminars in the parliament to already introduce the legislation or the prepared legislation changes to the decision makers. But to answer your questions, there's no clear instruments that we could use to force the adoption of the proposals.
Yes, plus like giving an example from the Czech Republic, we are preparing changes in our legislation focused on species protection, and it has been taken several years, and it is still not in the parliament. It is still being discussed among different ministries and experts and so on. So these legislative changes, they really take time. And what we've heard from the ministry people, from deputy minister, they are willing to work on it and continue working on it. And so if you want to have a last comment, and then we'll go for this lunch that was already mentioned here several times.
Հարցի հետ կապված ուզում եմ անդրադառնալ, որ SEPA համաձայնագիրը արդեն իսկ պարտավորություն է.
Is already a commitment and obligation for our country, and that this mission, this expert mission, is advisory for us to be able to live up to our commitment. And that is to say, the support that we received from Twinning is to solve our problem. And this means that we are interested primarily to have the amendments take place, for them to be adopted, and also for them to get ratified at the Parliament, regardless of all the challenges that those processes may entail. And there is just another addition I would like to make, that as I already mentioned, an analysis was conducted and the gaps have been identified, and all the recommendations were made in relation to and based on the identified gaps. So in a response to your question whether new issues will come afore, we're hopeful they will not in the near future, because we have identified the gaps that we are targeting.
Is there a pressing question, the last one? Or can we
postpone? I ask my question later on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So we heard we are all ready for some changes, but we cannot make changes if we are hungry. So I would recommend you to go to the same place as there was the coffee break. There is a lunch, and after lunch, say at 2 o'clock, we will meet back again here. Thank you very much.